Alrighty, woo! Hello. So many of you. Okay. Thank you to Out and Equal for even existing and having this space to create constructive conversations about diversity and equality in the workplace. It's really amazing. I'm honored to be here. So I'll get right to it. I don't come from a college background or academia, so I think it's best if I just focus on what I know, which for me is my journey. I want to take you back to a period of my life as a young, poor, trans person trying to get by in New York City as best as I could, while attempting to figure out exactly who I was in terms of gender, and who I wanted to be in terms of career, what I stood for, and what it took to get there. I was working at Bloomingdale's when I began the medical side of my transition. I still remember the day I was called into human resources and told I would not be allowed to use the women's restroom. Up until that point, I had used the men's room, but it had gotten increasingly hard for me the more and more feminine I began to appear. I remember one time I went to the bathroom and the male custodian said to me, "Sweetheart, you're in the wrong room." To which I did not have the energy to explain for the umpteenth time, so I just washed my hands and left. His response on my way out was, "Well, damn, I guess she's just freaky like that." This is one of the more mild examples of what I experienced using the restroom on the job. Oftentimes, I was made fun of and or catcalled by stock boys. I also endured occasional lewd encounters with perverts who would expose themselves to me or pleasure themselves at the urinal while I washed my hands. As I sat in human resources that day in the office, I was told I could either use continue to use the men's room, or I could travel to the 8th floor or 9th floor, I can't remember, all the way up from cosmetics into a manager's lounge where they had a single stall bathroom, and this was their alternate solution. And while I was happy to have a place to pee, this solution reminded me once again of my ever so present otherness. So this, among other events, took a toll on me at my place of work. I wasn't making enough money to finance my transition, and I didn't receive health benefits. And even if I did, this was all pre-trans health care. I had plenty of hormones and gender-affirming surgeries that I needed to pay for. And so by night, like most of the girls back in those days, I took to the West Village with my trans girlfriends from Brooklyn, who had showed me the ropes of survival sex work in a lucrative underground economy. It wasn't just the money that I needed, the money I needed to survive and transition. It was also a sense of community and sameness and camaraderie amongst the girls. Almost all of the girls I knew back then, the trans girls, in New York City dabbled in some sort of survival sex work. How else were we supposed to survive and pay for things like hormones and surgery and keep a roof over our head in New York City, cut off from our biological families, without a college education? Many of us whom were visibly trans couldn't even get a day job because of the heavy stigma attached. I was lucky that I had been hired when I was still presenting somewhat androgynous. But eventually, my nighttime hustle into the wee hours of the morning, sleep deprivation, and the daily discrimination and violence I experienced on my way to and at work affected my performance at my day job, catering to privileged upper-crust women of New York's East Side, sometimes spending 40 minutes or more deliberating between two lipstick colors that were virtually identical, while I was struggling to pay for my rent and estrogen and other gender-affirming surgeries. Thankfully, I was smart with my money. I never got dependent on drugs or anything else that could have gotten in the way of my financing my transition. So eventually, I got to a point in my transition where I, for the most part, passed. That is a term I hate now. But back in the day, it's what we were taught to strive for, to assimilate into society. And I worked very hard to achieve that passing ability. After I attained this privileged place of passing ability, most of the time anyway, I still needed to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. I wasn't college educated, and I couldn't break hold of the fast money lifestyle, so I used my passing ability to get hired in cis strip clubs all around the city. I became a master at compartmentalizing my life. No one in the strip club knew of my gender history except for my other trans girlfriends who also worked there, and a select few allies that we confided in. And so for 8 years, I danced and twirled and twerked and shimmied and made magic on that pole for A-listers and celebrities and famous actors and Wall Street millionaires and billionaires, financial types. But I hit my low point in year 2. The Trevor Project, whom I now work with, reports that around 40% of trans adults have attempted to take their own life. And one cold night in February 2008, I became a part of that statistic. Though I had achieved this semi-stealth existence and in many ways benefited from this place of passing privilege, I knew I was not living authentically, and I couldn't figure out a life past the hustle. It took its toll on me. After this rock bottom moment, I eventually learned the art of self-love in a world that I felt like didn't love me make space for me. And I invested in myself yet again, this time in the form of acting classes. 8 months into my first scene study acting class, I confided in my teacher and I disclosed to her that I was trans. Her response to me was, "Does your scene partner, Francisco, know?" Francisco and I were in a bedroom scene together that required a kiss and other intimacy. I told her no, and she said, "Well, good." She assured me that the way to go was to not disclose my transness to anyone in the industry besides my agent, whom I had already told, and that I should just proceed and move on and audition for normal cisgender female roles. I know that she said this out of protection for me, and it took a few years for me to land my first job shooting an indie film that showed at a festival in Times Square. Unfortunately, it was not released widely after because the producer discovered my trans identity and shelved the film. To be honest, it was low budget, and it's probably better that you didn't see it anyway, so it's fine. The next big job that I booked was on Law and Order, SVU, that, rite of passage for actors. And I remember being on set that day feeling a bit nervous and questioning, my past ability and doubting myself. And was I really getting under the radar? Would anyone find out? This kind of insanity that ran through my head almost constantly for years. And now I can look back and realize that this all ties into our expectations of women in general and how society views us as objects first and human beings second. And how we are always constantly critiquing ourselves and the way we look. That same year, a Black trans woman by the name of Elan Nettles was catcalled by a group of men in Harlem, where I then lived, and upon discovering that she was trans, they beat her to death. She died a block from my apartment at Harlem Hospital. While I passed as cisgender most of the time, I was not 100% exempt from being clocked or spooked, as we call it. And pretty much wherever you go in New York City, women are told to smile and whistled at and hissed at by men as if our sole purpose for being outside is for them. The thought that I could be catcalled and then, if discovered as trans, killed horrified me. And though this was not a new concept for me, as I had quickly learned on my journey to pass ability to carry mace and a blade in my purse on the subway, I think something about having this tragedy occur so close to my home, literally a block from my apartment, shook me to my core. I knew that being stealth and trying to pursue cis roles in TV and film and denying my transness was not doing anything to promote visibility. for the trans community. I knew that the world had to change, and I wanted to be a part of that change. Not only for the world, but for myself, for my own sanity. I wanted to know what it felt like to be truly transparent. No pun intended. And live my life authentically. So I slowly and safely took the steps I needed to make to begin living my life out loud. I enrolled in an LGBT acting class where for the first time, I was able to talk about my transness and really use it and put it up and through the text and use it in my work. And I feel like this is where I really began to sharpen my skills and hone in on my craft. 2 years ago, I cleaned out my locker at the strip club. It's as if the universe was, thank you. Shout out to Cardi B. Ow. I got the red bottoms on for you, girl. It's as if the universe was waiting for me to step into my truth. Literally, my truth and my purpose set me free. All those years of trying to blend in when I was really meant to just stand out and be a voice. I have always been the other, and I was meant to be seen and heard in my otherness. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of visibility and beyond. And I work in an industry where it's not a regular occurrence for a trans person to succeed. I think about my journey and where I've been and where some of my peers from my past may be now. Are they still alive? And are they healthy? Are they happy? I also can't help but wonder if some of this detour, if you will, could have been avoided had I been accepted on the job all of those years prior, and had I been accepted in my general day-to-day existence, had I been met with kindness on the subway every day traveling to and from work from Brooklyn to Midtown Manhattan, had I been loved and supported from the get-go by my biological family and peers. So I think it's important for me to share portions of my life with people who may not be able to walk in my shoes, but can at least hear where I've been and hopefully keep some of it with them so that they can create change in their place of work and all over the world for that matter, and create more inclusive environments for marginalized people, not just to exist, but to thrive. Thank you.